Hi there, I'm Brendan Crosdale, and welcome to the LAN party. I'm here in the west end of Portland, Maine, with the Craft Services Master General, Mike McLaughlin.
How's it going today?
Our co-host and producer, Andrew Nelson.
Hello.
The Baron of the West End himself, James Lowry.
Pleasure to be back.
And David fucking Manning.
Happy to be on.
You better be. You're a fucking guest.
It's our first guest.
It is. He's our first guest, so shut up. All right.
Shut up, but when you do talk into the microphone.
We'll tell you when it's okay to podcast. Fucking noob.
Are you sure I'm allowed to be in this room? It's pretty prestigious.
I'm sure I told you to shut up and you're talking.
I don't follow directions well.
Yeah. So our topic this week, we decided we really wanted to talk about licensed IP. And mostly because I was talking about this with the folks around the water cooler, and I realized there was an odd contradiction about this I have. In my head, I always think licensed video games suck. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized they're actually all pretty awesome. There's just a few ones that suck.
Yeah, and like in each individual IP, there's like a bunch of really good ones for each franchise, but there's always that one that's
just
terrible.
That ruins it for you. And then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, this is an interesting thing to discuss, because I think actually some of my favorite video games are licensed video games. They come from intellectual properties that were just really rad things that I loved anyways, even outside of gaming. I think it's important that I start with the example that came up first with this conversation for me. And for those of you who are PC gamers back in 1998, you'll understand my pain. I loved Jurassic Park. Before I realized I wasn't very smart, I wanted to be a paleontologist. That was never going to happen because I'm not good with the maths and the science and everything. I ended up going to art school.
Do you have to know math for...
You have to know things. They're learned men who can do precision work.
Well, you have to figure out how to write a proper grant request, so you have to learn how to scale up your numbers.
Yeah, they gotta beg for money.
I saw 3 velociraptors, but I only see 2 now.
Yeah. No.
Clever girl.
And probably the fact that I think math is involved in that is a sign I would not have been good at it. But either way, I fucking love dinosaurs. And when Jurassic Park came out, I had the entirely same reaction that every kid did when they saw it. They loved it. It had Tyrannosaurus Rex eating guys, and it had velociraptors and triceratops and Jeff Goldblum. There wasn't anything about that movie that I didn't love. And then I was like, oh, there'll be all these great games and toys. And I was fucking right. Until Jurassic Park Trespasser came out. And I remember this pretty vividly because The Lost World was the sequel that the game was supposed to be promoting. And there had been some good Jurassic Park games that had been out there. The Genesis had the platformer that was pretty good.
It was absolutely fantastic, beyond pretty good.
Yeah,
you got to play as a velociraptor.
And it was a rad game. Everybody loved that part of it. And it was like the big flip because you played as Grant during the beginning part, and then all of a sudden you were like, I'm the dinosaur.
Wait, I want to go back a couple sentences. What console was this on?
That was on the Genesis, yeah.
Okay.
It's one of the rare games that made it to Sega. A licensed IP, so they didn't develop it in-house, which is probably why it was good.
Uh-huh.
And, it was decent.
Okay.
Thing about it is, though, eventually they decided to branch out, and they started talking a big game about a PC Jurassic Park game they were going to release, which was going to be this game Trespasser. And I even remember back as a kid, there was a lot of hype behind this game. It was going to be the game that revolutionized FPS. And we were going to get to play with dinosaurs on an island, and it was going to be great. And what we actually got, for anybody who remembers this game, was the most awkward, shitty first-person shooter of all time. Basically, Surgeon Simulator is a large nod to how this game worked, because what would happen is it was first-person perspective, but if you wanted to use a weapon, you would pick it up with your limb, which hung out in front of you on the screen, and you would flail it about in the direction of the dinosaur that was trying to kill you, and then hold the trigger down and hope it killed them. Now, aiming with any kind of precision or like operating things like chairs or doors was very hard in this game to begin with. Weapons were like straight out. And your limbs would get stuck on things, and you would get mauled to death by dinosaurs before you could literally do anything in this game right.
It was this really rare exception to the classic rule that all FPSs are better on PC.
Oh, yeah.
They somehow managed to take a perfect control scheme and completely destroy it.
Well, and like, it was such a bad concept for how the game would work. And what was worse was it was Jurassic Park. Because
much like the idea of Jurassic Park of putting you on an island with dinosaurs sounds cool, it was horribly executed and people died.
Right, exactly. That is literally what it is, a microcosm for the mistakes made. and yeah, I always remember that. And when I think about licensed games, Trespasser is one of those ones that comes to mind every time. Is I'm like, God, that game was terrible. Why do they always ruin the things I love with these crappy games? But it's really untrue because Jurassic Park itself had a pretty good slew of decent games. A Genesis game. There was one on SNES. It was awkward, like split between FPS and top-down adventure game, but it was still a decent game. And
the one Jurassic Park game that I remember is a arcade light switch gun shooter. That standalone, like I wasted so many quarters on that freaking game.
Right, you get into the like the light proof box.
You got the
and
gun.
It moves around.
That was your Jeep.
It was the Jeep. And it was the rail shooter, but it was still awesome.
It was fantastic.
Was that the one where the Stegosaurus or something comes and helps you at one point?
Yeah, and the Brontosaurus, in order to kill you, takes a giant dump on you. I spent a lot of time playing the game.
Yeah, well, and then like they had some success with that, and then the IP went to Telltale, who's now renowned for doing The Walking Dead and The Wolf Among Us and Borderlands and all those. They did a Jurassic Park episodic adventure series that was fucking terrible. I mean, it was like practically unplayably bad and written. And so it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder how you make a good licensed game and how difficult it has to be for these developers to try and transfer these properties. Because like it makes me think of some other, the other example that leaps to mind for everybody else who I was talking to was Arkham Asylum.
Right.
There's a slew of Batman games across a ton of different consoles. Not all of them very good or memorable, but Arkham Asylum, and it's the trilogy that built out of it, seems to be universally lauded as an amazing Batman game.
Except for Origins.
Batman has that problem as a franchise. Even in comic books, there have been some really bad runs of Batman comics, and there have been some really, 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 really bad Batman movies.
Yeah.
Really bad Batman movies. Unwatchable pieces of shit.
Rotten nipples. Rotten nipples.
That one seal song.
So it's really, I think, with licensed games about catching lightning in a bottle. Yeah. But there are a lot of do's and don'ts. What I wanted to talk to everybody about was a very special year in video game history, 1982, which saw the first great licensed IP success in games and the first horrendous, gut-wrenching, butthole-clenching failures
almost
in that adaptation. It was really cataclysmic.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know,
oh no,
this game released in December of 1982, E.T., the extraterrestrial, actually crashed the entire gaming market.
Yeah.
It did. It's called The Great Crash of 1983. But going back into the history of this game,
the year I was born, by
designed by a man named Howard Scott Warshaw, who was a very well-lauded designer at the time. He put a lot of great games. Spielberg actually sought him out specifically because he was the big man on campus to get to make your game. Unfortunately, because of the way corporate bureaucracy and licensing works, he only had 5.5 weeks to make the game. They spent $125 million on this game, not including to 20 to 25 additional million.
Is that adjusted for inflation or 125 million in
That is
82?
real. That is the cost. And I'm going to tell you why in a second here. It's not because they spent loads of money on designing the game in that 5.5 weeks. They spent a lot of money on producing the game.
So blow and power suits.
No. Cartridges. They made more ET cartridges than there were Atari 2600s in the market.
Now, damn if that isn't a plan.
Even if everyone in the market had bought one copy, there would still be extras.
This game is going to be so good. We're going to sell more consoles. We're going to put every other console out of business. There's one other console.
Quick 80s montage.
This is actually what went down in a place called Alamogordo, New Mexico.
Oh, yeah, they did coverage of this on IGN.
They did. They dug them up a few years ago. There were 728,000 cartridges
in a landfill.
Buried in one landfill.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, so that's a notorious failure. What was your success from 82?
Tron.
Yes.
It was given that year. It was the arcade game of the year. It was the first major success of a licensed movie, partially because it was a movie that looked like a video game.
Yeah.
It was a natural fit, and because this arcade cabinet was stacked with 4 different games that you could play.
Which obviously Light Racer was the best.
Oh yeah, everybody knows that, but they were all great. It actually made $45 million as an arcade machine in its first year.
Well, I mean, we were talking about this earlier. I really want to see Seventh Son because Jeff Bridges is in it. So Tron pretty much holds up to that same standard even in 82.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Like, man, come on.
come on, man.
Come on, man.
I can't do Jeff Bridges. Nobody can do Jeff Bridges except
Only
for
Jeff Bridges. Could
Probably a
do
law
Jeff
against
Bridges.
that somewhere.
What?
I'll be against being Jeff Bridges without being Jeff Bridges.
That's true.
No doppelgangers allowed.
I think that's more like
Except
a universal constant. We're trying to prevent breaking the rules of causality.
Clue is the only actual doppelganger allowed.
Clue.
Yeah.
From Tron.
But he wasn't allowed.
But he is now.
But that was like the premise
Haven't
of
you seen the Neutron, man?
Oh, yeah, de-resed. Get that Daft Punk, get them sexy lady and the giant thing that goes over the rock part.
The movie was okay.
It was kind of an acid trip of thing. But, you know, whatever. We forgive it. It's Tron.
One stunt guy who played every bad guy, and he used the same flip over and over and over
Oh,
again.
my God.
Might as well just be like the Wilhelm scream of stunt guys.
And I
Pretty
think
much.
actually that's...
I mean, he was great, highly talented. I was just... Guys, come on.
I think actually Tron might be an example of what I think might be the guiding principle in making a successful IP, licensed IP game, which is you have to make the game. It will use the licensed property, but you can't be trying to make the movie or the book or the television show as a game. You have to say, here's our character or our world or whatever. I'm going to build a video game in it.
Yeah.
The 80s gave rise to the Star Wars X-Wing cabinet game. The sit down that you had. It was totally rad, like faux 3D.
It had the vector graphics.
It had the vector graphics, yeah, and there's these great photos of like George Lucas sitting in it the first time they made it, where he's still thin and cool. Like that game was completely awesome, and it was like I even remember that as a kid playing that at Fun Spot and having a great time with it. I mean, that was way past when that game was current, but it was still one of the coolest video games I ever played because it very cleanly sold the fantasy of flying an X-Wing and blowing up the Death Star. And it let you live that moment from the movie really well. So that was a very, very successful licensed game, that one.
I think timing is really important for IPs being released on video games as well. Batman is a good example of that. I mean, the best 3 Batman movies I personally think we've ever gotten coincide with the best 3 Batman games we've ever gotten.
Well, sort of. We did get a Batman Begins video game that was terrible.
Okay, Batman Begins is the weaker of the 3 new Batman movies, too, so...
Gauntlet thrown down on Batman Begins.
It's a good movie, it's just not as good as...
Shots fired. Chris Nolan's mad.
Chris Nolan
He listens to this.
has a lot to figure out with space-time. I'm not gonna listen to his shit.
Wow.
Alright? I have thoughts on Interstellar.
What do you think the
But
IP
I think that timing has a lot to play with this because... You know, you release a Batman game without any sort of precedence where people are interested in it at all. Less people are going to buy it. Batman, obviously, is one of these things where it has the comics, True Detective. It's been around since fucking forever. Was the early 50s?
I have
Like
no
52
idea.
or something? Maybe
I
it was
know nothing
I think it might
about
have been
comic
before
books.
that. James would know.
Long ago.
I actually stopped paying attention for a split second. Would you mind repeating?
Trying to figure out what year Batman started out in.
True
Oh
Detective.
man, yeah, True
before.
Detective Comics. Batman was definitely one of the very first ones out of Detective Comics. So yeah, that was probably about 1953, but I could be dead wrong on that.
Alright, so I was close. But, I mean, Batman is one of these things where it's been around for a long time. The franchise is not obscure in any way, but then you have games come out every once in a while. For example, the early Lord of the Rings games. When they first came out with the movies, I mean, Lord of the Rings made a massive comeback because, yeah, there's always been that reader base. But, I mean, the books were published fucking forever ago.
Yeah.
And then they were like, let's make great movies out of this. And they timed it, and the first game on the PS2 was okay.
Yeah, just okay, though.
It was just okay. I remember at one point you're playing and you're like gonna fight off the Nazgul or whatever, and like that's cool, but the rest of the game is completely lackluster.
It was a good. It was a good Gauntlet style slasher.
Yeah.
Mechanically, it was sound.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that there's timing with, if you're making a good, I mean, the rest of the Lord of the Rings games did get pretty decent, especially for like the RTS games. But I mean, if you time the games to be released with the hype of the movie, it's going to be, you have a better chance of doing
You get that
well.
zeitgeist. You can
Right.
roll with the whole momentum of it.
I mean, another great example of this is the Spider-Man games that
Yeah.
came out on the PS2.
Yep.
Absolute gems in there. Also, later on, some really bad games.
yeah,
just
that
like
was a
there were
franchise that
some
went downhill
really
on a
bad
very,
movies.
very steep grade.
It did. But for a moment, they really captured not just the top of cinema, I guess. I mean, they were making tons of money there.
Yeah.
But they'd also captured the video game market.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
so did the
actually
movies.
interesting too because apparently there's been a pretty good successful Spider-Man game for damn near every single system. This goes back to the Atari. Now I'm not going to say the one that I have experience with, which is the Spider-Man game Revenge of the Sinister Six.
It's a mouthful.
Hey, it's comic books. I mean, I'm not going to say that it was a stellar game, but for an NES to be able to have the kind of Spider-Man feel in the web slinging and be able to have that be a cohesive system, I mean, that was a pretty impressive achievement.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think actually talking with David at work, one of the license IPs that we like the most is one that probably benefits from that sort of momentum constantly, especially because it's an annual, and that's Madden. Madden gets released every year, and it is the football season hype. Is a hype train, and once you are in on that Madden train, you ride it.
And it doesn't really matter what year Madden you're playing.
No,
It's
totally
all the same game.
Well, that's a question. Is
Just making fun of John Madden the whole time because you got to get the football across the field to the other.
John Madden a la Cosby.
Is there much of a difference?
yes.
Yeah, one of them's an asshole, and the other one is a respected member of American culture.
The look on your face there.
Now I'm trying to decide which one we're talking about.
John Madden is a good man. Bill Cosby is apparently a monster.
Yeah, he is a monster. Anyway, current events aside, do you think it's because it's a yearly release that it does well, or do you think it's because it's football and football games have been around since?
I think it's a little
Forever.
bit of both.
Yeah, I mean,
really.
It beat out all the other football games.
It did. Madden stomped out every other franchise, whether it was good or bad.
It is pretty much the only franchise for NFL anymore.
Yeah, we've lost everything else that we had.
Hey man, Blitz was fun.
Blitz was
Blitz was
amazing.
It was a
awesome.
great game.
That was a great game.
Yeah, but those were the heady days coming off the XFL where we had ideas about what we could do in America. But I think some,
Trampoline basketball. Sounds great, is actually pretty great.
Yeah, it is.
It was a lot of fun to watch.
well, I think part of the success of Madden is that it's an annual and everybody expects it, but that could be said for the NFL. Like every year you get to watch another season, you get to get invested in it and everything like that.
And you get to be disappointed. Unless you live in New England this year.
In which case this year, you're remembering that Tom Brady is the greatest living quarterback.
He is a demigod.
He is. Those beautiful
Patriots
face
magic.
and eyes.
We've said a lot of inflammatory things, but this is the first thing I think that will actually get us hate mail.
Well, you know what? I love you, Tom Brady. I really hope you hear that. But
You
I
should
think
see his face.
I think
So sincere.
I think the thing about
Tom
Madden
Brady.
2 is that it is a game that fully embraces the idea that they have built a game to create the experience of doing that. It is the most wholly invested in trying to translate football into a video game
Right.
that I think any sports franchise has really gone to. I think it could be said that MLB The Show and the NHL game that EA produces as well, they're very good. They're really good at what they do, and I understand that for baseball fans, MLB The Show is an amazing baseball sim. But I don't think they've had the same kind of financial success as Madden, not only because football is kind of a bigger sport, but because Madden is accessible to people who don't even really like football. There are a lot of video game players who could care less about football who are good at Madden.
Right. Well, there's also regionally, I mean, FIFA sells insanely well in other countries. I mean, in the United States, Madden NFL is one of the top performers for sales every year.
Yeah.
But I mean, you go to South America, you go to Europe, FIFA obviously is their equivalent, and it does very well. And also, it seems like a lot slower paced of a video game as well.
Yeah,
I mean-
I don't really have a huge amount of experience playing soccer games.
I don't have a lot of experience playing sports.
Aw, sad indoor kid.
No, I was just fat and lazy. I went outside. I just sucked it. I played midfield in lacrosse in middle school. Worst decision of my life and anybody who had to interact with me on the field. So slow. So bad. Mike played defense because he knew he was slow.
It was nice to only have to run up half the field.
Just got to hit people.
Now, I mean, Madden itself is easy to play, but there are some people who take it to that next level.
Like with any game.
The league. I'm talking about, like, running your own leagues. When you play fantasy football, like, you select your drafts and all that stuff, but you can actually simulate it, and it's a lot easier on Madden.
Yeah.
And some people get crazy about it.
Well, and it has that investment of the community around it because of it. Because then you have all these players who are very invested in that game because of how well structured it is. I think that's a lot of its success is not just because it's an annual, because the NFL is an amazing IP to be doing, but because that game is just made so well.
It's brutal.
I mean, it sure beats the crap out of Tecmo Bowl.
I don't know. Tecmo Bowl, you get that fake punt to fall back on anytime you need a TD. Oh, Tecmo Bowl. Yeah, well, and I think, too, sports games in general, that sort of leads me into one of the other games I was thinking about. Is Gran Turismo and Forza.
Racing games, yeah.
I think those are incredible examples of powerfully good licensed games, and they are licensing literally motorsport. Like, they're like, we're going to go after manufacturers and physical locations, and companies like Pirelli. Nobody really needs to simulate racing tires, but we're going to put their logo on everything.
Give money.
Right, because they're part of that world. And those are, I think they fabulously use that tech. Like, those games are works of art. Forza Motorsport is just a beautiful game. Even if you don't like driving sims or cars or anything, just looking at the way it's structured and built, it is visually breathtaking.
Okay, so here's my thing with NFL, really any sports games and racing games, is I feel like there's really not a whole lot of growth game to game. You just get visually a little bit prettier every time. I think it's been the same game for 5 or 6 years now.
I'm going to disagree with that.
Even longer.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
I mean, yeah.
As a longtime Gran Turismo player especially, racing games have evolved tremendously to the point where...
For a second, I thought you were about to try to say, no, Madden's different every year.
No.
Gran Turismo's legit, man.
Yeah, Gran Turismo and Forza Motorsport are two games that have evolved heavily.
Like last year they didn't have this card. This year they do have this card.
Well, but like they change all sorts of investments you can do. Like the latest versions of Forza that they put out that came out on Xbox One, they visually scanned racetracks to put them in there. So if you go to Imola to do the race, the dents that are left there permanently by the concrete being broken years ago that everyone knows are there who follows F1, they can see that and drive over it in the race. Like, they've embraced the idea of this, like, inhuman level of detail built into the games, that kind of resolution in every aspect of the game has been something to strive for. I think even with Madden, it has evolved. It doesn't do as much year to year, but when you start looking at it in clumps, you start to see how the features build up. And that's not entirely on the developers. They have 1 year dev cycles on those games. That's insane. To rebuild and put out that game in any functional quality in 1 year, like, they have the hardest development job in video games, bar none.
For racing games or for yearly?
For annual sports games.
Okay.
Like, if they're putting those out, that is just an inhuman task on those guys. They sleep literally in the offices to keep working on them to get them done in time because the turnaround time on it is just insane. So the fact that there's any innovation in them is pretty impressive considering they're releasing them every year.
Well, I mean,
not
that's
to
what I was
mention-
saying about football games, especially. I mean, from the outside, it seems to me that they're basically just reskinning everything. And, I mean, as far as mechanically, there's not a huge amount of difference.
Well, I mean, really, when you go into the specific teams, they all have specific plays. They're all based on the same kind of thing, but like,
Honestly,
they all run different formations.
the way I look at it, it's not really so much a game as it is a subscription.
Yeah,
You
Madden is
pay
a
your
platform.
$60 subscription
Yeah.
yearly for Madden.
Yeah, and there's going to continually be advances, but it is a gradual effect for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think as far as sports are, those are usually IPs that are implemented really well. That said, there are a bunch of really terrible sports games, which is part of the reason Madden's all we have left is because there were a couple of competitors that were okay, but on the whole...
I mean, it's hard to compare any video game to Backyard Baseball.
I love that sentence. That's our takeaway. Just throw that up there.
I'll put that at the beginning and the end.
You have a strong love for Backyard Baseball?
Do you not?
No.
Does anyone dislike Backyard Baseball?
Never played it.
You missed out, man.
Yeah.
It really it was a premium game. The graphics The
Are we remembering the same game right now?
highly developed physics engine.
Oh, there you go. We're not.
I'm still here trying to find the one football game that I ever cared about where it took place in medieval times and you played a knight. You played a knight and you had your team of thugs and the other knight had his team and his team of thugs and you could murder the other players.
This is what I'm talking about. They just keep reskinning Madden.
We already talked about the XFL.
J.R.R. Tolkien presents.
Yeah, now we're just melting them all together.
Yeah. That's actually, just as a weird side about that, one of my favorite SNES games I owned was Mega Man Soccer. Did you ever play that?
No.
It was like, it wasn't really a soccer game, like it sort of was, but it had the robots from the Mega Man franchise, and they all had like a unique kick that like simulated their weapon.
Speaking about franchises you hate, Sonic Spinball was actually probably one of the greatest. And if you don't consider pinball a sport, I don't know what's wrong with you, but probably one of the greatest
You know what?
sports games ever.
This pulls into something that we discussed in one of our first games, or first podcasts. Pokemon Snap.
What?
I mean, I guess that's not really a licensed game, but
It's an IP that wasn't originally developed to be a video game.
Yeah, it was.
No, it
Pokemon
wasn't.
was 100% developed to be a
I
video
thought it was
game.
started as a card game.
No.
Nope.
That
Licensed
followed
to
after.
cards eventually, but Pocket Monsters was wholly built for
Even the
video
cartoon
game.
was added later.
Yeah. It's a marketing juggernaut to sell a video game.
And that poor guy.
And an amazing video game, which did have a lot of spin-offs, including the blighted Pokemon Snap.
It was the worst game ever made.
It's not the worst.
Well, we covered that.
The
We
worst game
covered
ever
it.
made is Superman
than
64, which is a licensed game. And it is actually probably the worst video game of all time. And that, I think those are the ones that stand out in my head when I first think about, licensed IP blows, is I think of those just bombs. Superman 64, I don't even have to go into it because this is going on the internet, and the internet knows all about how bad this game is. If you've never seen it, go watch a Let's Play. It's abysmal. Like, it was this terrible game that came out on a blighted console that had a few great games at home, but not anywhere near the library it needed. And when they got Superman, there were a lot of people very hopeful that they'd get this experience like the cartoon show or something.
I think what you're saying about the N64 is extremely unfair because GoldenEye.
Yeah, listen, I'm looking at the list of the N64 and every other.
And you can name every good game on the N64 before running out of fingers. That's not even a joke.
What?
GoldenEye is one of them, but if there are more than 10 games worth playing on that system, then...
On the N64?
Yeah.
Star Fox.
Super Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, GoldenEye.
Madden.
We're going to go with Madden NFL. I'll give you that one.
NFL Blitz?
I don't actually think NFL Blitz was a good game, but if you want it on the list, that brings you to 7.
Pod Racer.
That was a
Star
great
Wars
fucking
Pod
game.
Racer.
That was a great game.
No,
Star Wars
game.
Pod
Brandon,
Racer.
Are you serious
With the
right now?
super racist alien junk dealer and the nigh
Is it
unplayably
racist if they're
bad
made
graphics.
up, races?
That game barely
Yes.
worked on
Yes,
PC.
it was a very thinly veiled anti-Semitic character.
and it was not a good port to the N64. Like on PC, that game ran okay. It was not a strong port on the N64.
I'm not taking this garbage. That game handled beautifully.
It had bad frame rate issues and it looked like crap.
What game in 1999 didn't have good frame or had good frame rate on any of the consoles?
The ones on computers had good frame rate. The consoles in general didn't have them, but some of the consoles like PlayStation steered away from games that needed them.
Garbage.
I won't give you Pod Racer.
No, no. You know
I
what?
can't do it.
I'm
That's
not
the hill I'm going to
participating in this.
die on.
All right, listen, I want to go back to James Bond
Yeah.
because that is also, I think GoldenEye is the only good game to come out of that IP.
Could be. Yeah.
No, I'm looking at the list. It's the only good one.
That's the only one.
Yeah, I got
He's
it.
got a
It's
point there.
GoldenEye was great. James Bond 007 appears 3 times on this list over the span of 15 years.
What was the broken one? Tomorrow Never Dies, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm
God,
getting to
it was
that.
so-
I am getting to it.
I actually asked for that for Christmas one year. That was the biggest mistake.
sorry
That was
for
a waste of a Christmas present.
See, okay, so the James Bond games were games that my dad and I enjoyed playing together. We played GoldenEye, it was great. Played Tomorrow Never Dies, it was okay.
But you were still drinking the Kool-Aid. You
I
were
was
like,
still drinking-
I like this.
Yeah, this is good. There's no better games. And then we got The World Is Not Enough.
And it
That game
actually
was-
was enough.
That game was actually enough. That game was so bad. There were so many frame rate issues with that. That is an example of a PS1 game where it's just terrible.
Yeah, well, I was actually talking
But-
to James about this yesterday.
The worst is 007 Racing.
There was a racing game.
Wow, I
had
didn't
it.
know this.
I had it. It was terrible.
Did you drive like the Q car with like
Yeah.
the missiles? That actually sounds kind of
No.
rad, but it wasn't good.
No, it's like if they tried to make a legit racing game and then threw on like the missiles at the end.
It's like the No Land Beyond of video games.
Shots fired at No Land Beyond. More shots than it can fire.
Wait. You gotta wait for the reload.
No, but I was
Okay,
I was talking to James how Rare basically made an apology for all those other developers who came in and made games after GoldenEye because it was a slew of these really crappy James Bond games, even on the 64 and the PlayStation. And they made Perfect Dark, where they were basically like, hey, here's everything you loved about GoldenEye again in our strange space alien story that is really just a conceit for the sandbox for multiplayer.
There's another good game you can add to the list.
That's true. Perfect Dark is added to the list, but with the massive caveat that it barely worked.
Yeah.
If you had the expansion pack in your N64, it worked okay. And actually, I can add another game to that list. Rogue Squadron. Level 5 in the Golden Age. That was an amazing licensed game. Rogue Squadron and its follow-up on GameCube.
I played the GameCube one. I did not
amazing
play the
games.
N64 Rogue
Well, I
Squadron.
mean, to be fair, how many bad Star Wars games have we had?
Well, okay, I was thinking about that at work today.
Battlefront was awesome.
Yeah, there are a lot of really good ones. The Super Star Wars games on SNES, I liked a lot as platformers.
Oh, I had
Dark Forces.
Dark Forces is amazing.
KOTOR.
KOTOR is
Oh my
amazing. Like, you have Rogue Squadron, TIE Fighter versus X-Wing. Fucking
So many
Jedi
hours.
Starfighter.
Force Unleashed was great. Jedi
Unleashed.
Academy
Oh.
was really good.
What was the MMO that they had?
The MMO's good.
Yeah.
The Old Republic Online or whatever it's
Yeah.
called.
I had a friend who was super into that game. He had like 3 different Jedis, and you got to decide if you wanted to be a Sith or a Jedi.
Yeah, I even played that game when it had the crappy microtransactions, and it was still a blast.
Yeah.
Like, it was just a cool game. It's well
I
designed.
never played it because I was like wrist deep in World of Warcraft at the time. But
Yeah. But yeah, like, I think Star Wars has actually been blessed with a lot of good iterations on it.
I mean, to be fair, that also brings us to Star Wars Galaxies, the original MMO of that
Yeah,
game.
no
that
good.
was, we can forget that existed, or we can
PlayStation
try.
1 era, real turd. Grant Poulin, shout out to you. You brought this one up tonight. Masters of Terrascasi. It's a Star Wars fighting game.
Oh,
It was
man.
really
Oh
fucking
my god, I
bad.
played that.
PS1.
Yep.
I played that game.
Yeah, it was really bad.
It was terrible. Oh god, I forgot that it existed.
It was usable, but
having
everybody
shitty
moved like they were
flashbacks.
wearing iron boots,
Yeah,
you know.
it
And
was not the best game
well,
ever.
all right. So I'm looking.
oh yes, and Darth Vader was broken. Darth
we
Vader
talked-
was hideously broken.
We talked about capturing lightning in a bottle, and I'm looking over this. Keep coming back to this for James Bond. I keep looking over this timeline, and you got 1997, GoldenEye 007 came out. Possibly one of the best games on the N64.
Yeah, GoldenEye's up
Possibly a game-changing video game for first-person shooters.
Yeah, very
Definitely.
influential. title.
Especially for
Yeah.
that online, or not that online, but the multiplayer that you could play.
Yeah, it was a couch multiplayer like setup game.
It was amazing. And then in 2005, oddly enough, okay, so there's GoldenEye Rogue Agent, which I never
I owned
played.
that. That's
Was
a
it good?
GameCube game.
Well, it was a GameCube. Was it?
It's a weird game, but I won't say it's bad.
Yeah.
It was a cyberpunk version of GoldenEye.
hell yeah.
You actually
about that.
The golden eye portion of the game literally comes from a robo-mechanical eye you have installed in your face.
Yes.
I'm not even making this up. This is the
I am
plot of the
about
game.
that.
And the game starts out with you working for Goldfinger in this like techno hell future where these like Gestapo cyberpunk Nazi guys are running around stealing money from all the world banks, and basically it was this guns blazing like rope cable descent from the walls off the wall shooter. It was really good. It actually had pretty
Sounds
good multiplayer.
awesome. How did I not play this game?
This was the thing too. It had like a really awesome soundtrack. It had like this crazy like thumping techno kind of club music that went along with what you did. The caveat on that game was the control scheme was not very good. It was set up for the GameCube controller, which is probably one of the worst controllers ever made. And it just didn't work. And the more you like tried to work with it to try and get something out of it, the like harder it fought you to be like, no, I suck. Stop trying.
Well, okay, so within 2 years, you had GoldenEye Rogue Agent and you had GoldenEye Source, which I'm assuming is the source port on the Source engine.
Yeah, it was the rebuild that they did on Steam.
It wasn't even an official rebuild. It was
No, it was they rebuilt it in
all third party,
Source
wasn't
engine, yeah, and it was just a mod that people had built where you could replay all the golden.
I never actually played it. I heard it was great, but then last year they did GoldenEye 007 re-release. I never played it.
No.
Did anybody?
No.
I think that
Crickets.
you just reached.
We didn't get a Skyfall game.
No, we got a Quantum of Solace game. I think they gave up.
Quantum of
after that.
Solace was definitely the one to pick.
Yeah,
was-
it wasn't the worst.
Do I sense
Yeah,
a
it
bit of
was the worst.
sarcasm?
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff.
Skyfall would have been boring anyway. It would have just been a lot of babysitting.
You just follow Judi Dench around waiting to get attacked.
Actually, that would be a great
This is
game.
the selling point of the game. You get to play as Judi Dench.
That I would buy. Oh man.
And then it turns into the beginning of Oblivion, and Patrick Stewart shows up, and then it's just
There you
the
go.
two
Just,
best British actors ever to live.
oh my god. Yeah, well, Patrick Stewart, you bring up, his alma mater of television, Star Trek, and I have trouble thinking of a good Star Trek game. I was trying to today to try and remember one,
Man.
and I don't have it.
I've got one. I don't have the name off the top of my head, but it was an old Mac release, and it wasn't for next gen. It was for the original Star Trek. And you'd go down and first off, it was incredibly frustrating because the star map had no labels. They assumed that you had had the star map with your game, but somehow my game didn't come with the star map, and so I kind of had to pick around by random to find it.
Stardate 2543. I went in a straight line for 3 years. Found nothing.
So when you actually do get to the place that you're trying to get to, and it sends you down as the classic away team of, Captain, Spock, and Scotty in your classic red shirt. And the thing is that your health bar is basically your red shirt, because you could sit there and you could go up to these puzzles. Like one of the first ones you go in is, oh, this cave we need to get into where these weird emissions are coming from. Well, let's use the phaser to try to melt a rock and create, get some of the rocks down. And so you phaser it, and of course the rock seeks out the red shirt unerringly like a heat-seeking missile and crushes him flat. Now you can no longer lose any members on your away team, because if you lose any of the 3 main members, then the mission fails. But, a lot of times you went down there and you're like, that looks dumb and stupid, but I could save some time. Red shirt?
It's classic.
We've been talking about a lot of really both good and bad movie to game tie-ins, but what about game to movie?
Dun,
what about
dun, dun.
Mortal Kombat and Super Mario Brothers, the movie?
Wait.
Super Mario Brothers the movie
Wait.
was the best. Just going out there.
Ooh, Dwayne the Rock Johnson.
Had that first person sequence at the very end that everyone sat through the movie to watch.
Wait. Max Payne.
Oh, but Mila Kunis is in that movie. I can't hate that.
Ooh,
That makes me hate it more.
And that's a Marky Mark movie. No, I stand by Max
No,
Payne.
Mark is a racist piece of shit.
You just like the people in the movie. You don't actually like the movie.
Yeah,
you just like looking at Marky Mark's
Okay,
face.
if you showed up at the movie theater and you were like, Max Payne, probably going to be cinema, you fucked up.
But hold on. That's an example of a game that actually, it was a very cinematic game in the first place. It should have been good, but it was so bad.
It was a
It's
great
just like a
game.
really good movie that should have had a good game.
Yeah, well,
but didn't.
I don't know. The game to movie thing is a little rough, I think, because in film they keep approaching this problem the wrong way that I think happens with games.
Wait.
They're not saying, let me make a movie that uses this IP. They're saying, how do I make that game, that specific game, into a movie? And it keeps failing relentlessly on them. And I think Resident Evil is a great example of this. The Resident Evil movie, which I actually really like, is not a very
Which
good...
one?
The very first one. So you get the class, the one that they did, the first Mila Jovovich movie that they put out.
I'm starting to question your taste, man.
I said I like it. I'm not saying it's a great movie. I enjoy it. I like this movie a lot. I quote it a lot.
There are quotable lines in that movie?
God, We need to watch this movie together. You and I are gonna have a good time. But I like that movie a lot, and I feel like it for what it does is it captures everything that Resident Evil actually has going for it. It is a really campy horror story with a really, really basic kind of generic plot line, and then it has a bunch of violence against zombies, and it's sort of creepy and sort of actiony. And the movie is exactly what you wanted. That it's a bunch of popcorn you eat while you watch this cool thing, and it's done.
I like there is always that awesome like grid laser scene.
Yeah,
Falls apart. That's so good.
So good. Oh
Well,
my god.
Rooting for that guy so hard.
No, I wanted him to die.
Oh, brutal.
It's just like watching zombie movies. I always want the humans to die.
Oh, so you just get the black guy killed and get it out of the way. You know, we know you're black. We know you're gonna die.
Wow, that's not what I said.
That's how it goes.
Whoa.
Don't put words in my mouth.
That's what I
I'm going
heard.
to take us to like
Andrew Nelson on the internet. Black people die first. It's pretty much the
I'm gonna
sentence.
take
he
us to
said.
a nice.
I'm the one who edits this, so I can just take this portion of the podcast out. I want 5 seconds of silence right now.
Nope. 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 Nope.
Yeah, sorry,
That's
you're
the
saying
perfect
that.
sort of edit into this.
Yeah.
All right. Silent Hill
Thank you.
was a really good video game to movie translation.
Yeah, it was okay.
It was. It was.
really good.
It was great. Even.
Yeah,
I love that.
Okay. I don't love that movie, but it was alright.
I remember watching that movie and having a great. I was terrified. I'd play the games. I wasn't
It even had a
fan.
perfect ending.
It did.
Spoiler alert. Nothing goes right.
I remember really liking the music in that movie, and I liked a lot of the visual effects, but I remember thinking it was like, by the end, it was just ridiculous gore porn.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, Pyramid Head ripping the clothes off this woman and then ripping
Silent
the skin.
Hill kind of was horrific gore porn.
well, yeah, but that's the thing is that it could be a great translation of Silent Hill, which is probably why I didn't really like it. I'm not a big fan of
Or
Silent
the,
Hill.
or the cop roasting at the end. I had to leave the room. I was like 20 years old. I had to leave the room because it was too gross for me.
The weirdest part was wanting a hot dog.
No, that.
Now that is
that's-
the most awful thing that's been said on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think
No. That's gonna be the takeaway at the end of the episode. Weirdest thing is wanting a hot dog. Out of context.
well, and I
However,
think
I
like
can give the movie this, is that I was down in Pennsylvania shortly after. Actually, no, I watched that movie while I was in Pennsylvania. And so they've got those flood warning sirens.
yeah.
That movie has really made that klaxon warning not like, oh no, we need to get to shelter. It's, oh god, pyramids coming for my skin.
It's like living up in Dexter after watching It. Or really living in Maine after reading any Stephen King novel.
yeah, guys. For everyone who lives in the rest of the country, we want you to know that Maine is exactly how Stephen King describes it.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's actually uncannily accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Creepy clowns and
Yeah, well, I feel like there's not very many of these game to movie translations, but they keep trying, and eventually we're going to get one. In my personal opinion, we are going to get one very soon.
yeah.
The Warcraft movie, I can almost guarantee you will be great. And I don't feel any insecurity in saying that because of both the hand Blizzard's had in it and the time they've taken to develop it.
I'm really hoping that time does not prove you wrong.
No.
Because I think that we'll have a very sad Brendan if that is the case. just despondent outside the movie theater. Just, why
don't
go
know.
on?
I think time can be a slow poison for this movie. Because if they started making the movie 6 years ago, all of the tech and all of the CGI and that they may have worked on previously,
Well, they definitely didn't start filming it 6 years ago.
when did they start filming it?
They finished principal photography on the film this year,
Okay.
and they started this year.
Who's in it?
The guy who plays the main character on Vikings, he's
that guy,
the
yeah.
human character in it. And then there's a bunch of other like semi-famous people who they've gotten for the cast. There's nobody who's instantly recognizable.
That's actually possibly a good thing. Because you don't want to have like a Liam Neeson character that you just throw in and everyone's like, Liam Neeson! And the rest of the cast.
Qui-Gon Jinn.
Exactly.
He was the only good part of that movie.
We're not
Nope.
going down that rabbit hole.
We're not going back. How about this? Just because I want to talk about it. Talking about IPs and bad IPs and translations to movies. The first Final Fantasy movie.
With Alec Baldwin, the spirits within.
Alec Baldwin, Steve Buscemi.
Oh my god!
It was basically somebody said, Yeah, that seems kind of popular. Let's make a Final Fantasy movie that has nothing to do with Final
I feel like
Fantasy.
that is a case of something where the story behind how it was made is by far more interesting
Yeah.
than what you actually get.
I think that was the first time I ever said the word fuck in my life, was at the end of this movie. As a little kid going, what the fuck? Parents ashamed of me, but what the fuck is this?
They can't even like be mad at you. Your dad's like,
You know what?
son, don't
He's
say
right.
that, but I agree.
Where's Cloud?
Yeah, that was, oh god, that was really confusing when that movie came
Yeah.
out. I think for everyone involved. Especially because you would try to explain it to your like layman friends who didn't play video games, and like going into it, you were like, they're like, what's Final Fantasy? You're like, I don't know, it's got dragons and it's got all these like people with swords and things like that, and then you got in there and they're like, dude, there's no dragon. This is like Starship Troopers with ghosts. I don't get it.
Dude, you're totally yanking her chain, man.
Well, and then a few years after they came out with Advent Children,
Yeah.
which was a proper follow-up. That was awesome.
It's
However-
really visually interesting
Yeah.
and painfully Japanese,
It's Final Fantasy,
which is painfully Japanese.
so it's in line with the Final Fantasy
Sure, yeah.
motif. Then
Yeah.
okay.
It's like saying, I hate Lamborghinis because they're so Italian. They're so Italian. Of course, that's what makes them great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I liked Advent Children for what it was. I thought it was kind of cool, but at the same time, like, it's just not. It is, what I hate about it is the beginning of the descent of madness that has begun with Square. And they basically just haven't made a decent game from their core house production in, we're getting on nearly a decade. The only good games that Square has published that I can think of in the last 10 years have been its MMOs.
When did Final Fantasy X come out?
10 was released. God, I have no idea.
Probably
Let's look that up.
2004.
I was earlier than
That
that.
was earlier than that. I played that game in high school.
Absolutely. That was an early game, and
Yeah.
it was terrible.
Yeah,
What?
10. Yeah, 10 is like
10 was-
10 is where I strike
was
the
really
everything sucks from here on out.
Blitzball
was
was so
awful.
much fun.
Blitzball was dope as hell, and if they just made their own Blitzball game, I'd play the living crap out of that.
But everything else about that game, and especially the ending, horrible.
It was
Yeah, it's
terrible.
2000.
Oh, wait.
2001, wow.
Guys,
It's got-
we're forgetting Kingdom Hearts.
Kingdom Hearts was awesome.
Kingdom Hearts was also that old though.
Kingdom Hearts, no, that
No,
was
it's
on the
had games
PS2.
Kingdom Hearts 2 came out when I was in college. I still lived on State Street, so that has to be like my first or second year of college. Latest 2004.
Oh no, it was later than that.
For Kingdom Hearts 2.
For Kingdom Hearts 2, yeah.
Yeah. Andrew's got the internet.
Yeah, Kingdom Hearts 2... Jesus Christ. Oh, never mind. Kingdom Hearts 2 was 2005.
Okay. So
it's within
1
the
year
last
later than that.
decade.
Yeah.
But they've also had a million DS games.
Which all blew.
I have never played any.
I mean, that's the thing about it is Square, they just literally just produce worse and worse, more
I think-
insular.
I think we
garbage.
should stop here and talk for a minute too, because Kingdom Hearts is a double IP tie-in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
that's true.
Kingdom Hearts is probably one of the best examples of a licensed game gone right. I think Disney did an awesome job going to Square and being like, your wheelhouse is building these RPGs. We want to do an action RPG that uses broad swaths of our license. Can you do it? And I love those games. I loved Kingdom Hearts and Kingdom Hearts 2. All the spin-off games and everything like that. A bunch of meaningless crap, but
I'm not gonna lie, whenever I played that game, I kind of secretly wanted Cloud to kill Goofy so I could replace him.
No, but me too, though. I completely agree with you on this point.
You know, if we're talking about two contents coming in together, that jogs the memory, and that brings in all the different versus games. Capcom versus
Yep.
SNK, Marvel versus Capcom. You know, they were just pumping those out for a couple of years.
They're,
But let's face it, they were...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And let's face it, those were highly entertaining.
Yeah.
You know, I'd just sit there and you'd be like, you know, you'd just be playing for a while, and all of a sudden you'd go, why do my eyes hurt, and why am I sweaty and my feet hurt?
oh yeah.
I remember whenever I played Marvel versus Capcom, it was like I felt like I was, as a fanboy, cheating life because I was getting everything I wanted that didn't make any sense together, but everything that I wanted at the same time.
Oh yeah. Those games are incredible.
You could always turn to your friend, though, and then be like, told you Wolverine would whoop on Ryu.
Well,
Oh yeah. You can settle all these like ultimate disputes.
I will throw another shout out to Matt Sears because he did say whether or not when we were talking about this in our first podcast, he wanted to know if I was referring to Kirby in Super Smash or King in Capcom versus the other one.
SNK?
SNK. Thank you.
Yeah. You remember this ass beating so clearly that you've like blocked the game out of your head.
No, because apparently this was just like the hammer he would throw down when he was playing with you.
Oh yeah.
And just like the one that just like drove you up the wall.
Yeah, no, it was also the whole thing too, where that those were kind of his fallback characters. It'd be that you'd be in a good winning streak, and you'd be feeling your oats, and he'd sit there and be like, "Oh, I've got something real cheap in my bag here for you. Look at its glow. Absorb its radiation in your skin. Form. This is Kirby time."
I remember Marvel vs. Capcom. This friend of mine had in high school. His go-to was Servbot. They do that move where he just sets the table over and over again, and he just like chain it through. Oh my god, it was a nightmare.
Yeah, probably the worst would be you'd take a whooping from Matt as Kirby, and then somewhere during the day he'd almost like not even be thinking about it, and you'd just kind of be like, "Yeah, hey," and you just want to throttle him all over again.
I'm gonna kill you.
The franchise I was talking about with David that was actually kind of painful to handle was Ninja Turtles. Ninja Turtles had a bunch of good games built off it. Turtles in Time, that original arcade cabinet that was awesome. But David and I both have very clear recollections of an NES Ninja Turtles
because we're
game.
Nintendo kids.
Oh my god.
That was an impossible game.
That
The game
underwater
was
level.
unplayable.
Terrible.
All you have to say is underwater level. It was so frustrating. The
Has
stupid
there ever
like
been a good
vans.
underwater level?
Yeah, good point.
Well, yeah, there's some of them. Some of
No.
the water dungeons in Ocarina and Majora's Mask. I mean,
No, those are all.
That was like the most painful part of the whole game. I hate
Those are
the
the
water
worst parts of the
temples.
game.
I still
those
have
parts.
nightmares about the water temple. 17 years later, how dare you say this without a trigger warning?
all right, water levels off the table. Apparently, it's all bad news. No, but like that game, I viscerally remember to this day. Like that game sucks.
It was challenging. It was trying to do more than it could, and it was brutal. It did not give you any rewards for what you did.
Yeah.
Every time you died.
And SNES had Turtles in Time, which was a freaking awesome game. I mean, it was basically just like a higher frame rate rehash of the arcade cabinet game that they had going.
Which
And,
was awesome.
Yeah,
that arcade game was like top of my charts when I was a kid.
and that got rebuilt and reskinned as the Simpsons game that I think pretty
No
much
wonder they felt so
everybody-
similar.
Yeah, it's the same setup as it, and that was just a blast to play. Those were classic. Go to the arcade
Yeah, man.
and play with your friends.
Did you ever have
games.
a 4G?
The what?
You've never heard that term? 4G?
No.
Now everyone's looking at me weird. That's when you had
When you
four
have
players
four
on one
players.
cabinet.
Oh, you call it a 4G?
I didn't make up the term.
Wow. No, actually, I never call. I guess I've been a part of a 4G without even knowing it.
Wow.
There you go.
Cross that one off your list.
Boom.
Well, we should go down and have a 4G at Arcadia sometime.
There's 5 of
Oh yeah,
us.
they have turtles down there.
Somebody will have to sit and watch.
It's obviously Andrew.
Filmed that. Yeah,
Give me Bart. I'll hit people with my skateboard.
I was thinking this summer it'd be fun actually to go over to Fun Spot and just blast through those old arcade cabinets they have there and see if they'd let us do a cast from within the place talking about the games.
Yeah,
That
it would be
good.
a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, okay, but then we haven't really. I don't think we've mentioned it in detail. All of the Disney games on Sega Genesis were friggin' awesome.
You know, I'll have to agree with you. I'm a Nintendo kid. And
I know.
The one, my friend had a Sega, and the one game I remember is Aladdin.
So
Yeah.
good.
That game
One of the
was
best platforms.
awesome.
Having to get out of the
Cave of Wonders on the
Cave of
carpet?
Wonders on the carpet?
Oh my freaking
Well, and
god.
those
Yeah.
games are like a testament to Disney, their ability to attract money to the Sega console, which could not attract developers to make carts for it. Microprose was making some of those Disney games.
Yeah.
They had the developers who made Command and Conquer building those games. Like,
Westwood?
yeah, Westwood Studios built the Lion King video game that everybody fondly remembers. Yeah, that was them, and they would go on to make a bunch of games that people loved, and that was a developer who was not going to touch the Genesis for anything else, but that license could bring them in because it was a guaranteed check.
That game was awesome. I just always remember like the whole sequencer Just Can't Wait to Be King, where you have to like jump through all the crazy animals losing it, and that brings me back to possibly the best game on the Sega Genesis, in my opinion, X-Men Clone War.
Yeah, you brought that up in your Roots game.
It's has stuck with me. I
Callback joke.
fucking love. Yeah, callbacks are always necessary. I love that game. It's possibly the only X-Men game that I can think of that I actually enjoyed playing, other than a fighter game. Were there any other good X-Men games?
There
The
was.
Sega had a Wolverine one that I was very excited about until I played it.
There was it was just a couple of years ago. Oh my god, this is really gonna kill me. I can't remember the name of this game. But the X-Men game had the same setup as Gauntlet. You go in with your 4 different X-Men with all their different abilities. And,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, God. Someone on the internet, if you hear this, please send help.
Hold on,
Tell
I'm
me
up
what
to
the
It's
name
kind
of
of
the
like
internet is.
Marvel Alliance, right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of the problem with X-Men is that it's one of those IPs that seems like if you could give it the Arkham Asylum treatment, where a developer got their hands on it and we're told, just make the friggin' game. Don't make it about the movie that's coming out. Don't make it about the comic line that we're doing. Don't make it about selling toys or something. Just make a great Wolverine game. Make a great Rogue game. Make a great Jean Grey game. They can knock that one out of the park. There's a bunch of developers who could make that. And I think that is literally what it comes down to, is if the developer's given the leeway to make the game pure about the IP, then you get these awesome titles. And when they're restricted to using it to market something else, or they're put in these strange time crunch windows, that's when you start to get these real turds.
I would love, as a developer, to have an excuse to be able to dig up the old cartoon show's voice cast, because I thought all of them were absolutely great.
Yeah.
And
They're
just
like,
oh yeah, Saturday mornings with the 90s version of the X-Men, and I think that's actually their gold team setup. No, I'm sorry, it's their blue team setup. Yes, comic book nerd here.
Yeah, James is the resident comic book nerd here.
He's our go-to with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be totally rad. And I feel like there are a lot of studios out there that could actually give that game like an excellent treatment. There are people who have like the pedigree for building those kinds of action games that could go out and do it.
You know, and it's one of those things as well where I'm sure grabbing the licenses for the movie production, I'm sure that's a huge investment. Yeah. Whereas, say you could go to Marvel on, one of their lower lines or something like that and be like, hey, we really like this story arc. We think that it would translate well into a game. And let's be honest, comic books are a little depressed at the moment. We think that we can get a good deal going here.
Yeah.
How about, all right, here's a question. What's an IP that you would like to see turned into a video game?
Ooh.
IP that's not already a video game, you'd like to see it turned into a video game.
Yeah.
Do you have
That's
one
a
in
good
mind?
question.
I'm trying to think of one. I feel like they've already done it with everything.
Simpsons did it.
That's what I like to see.
Actually, it could be hideous, but an attempt to try out a new Avengers thing. They did have
been an IP, or it's already been a video game, haven't they?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the Avengers sounds like its own pure video game, though.
Right.
Actually, they did way back in the day. It was a very similar setup to Turtles in Time and Simpsons and those, but it was an Avengers game. And it had one of the worst sound files on it for that Avengers Assemble, because what you got was...
So good. Yeah, the Disney Infinity that's out right now actually has a bunch of playsets that are based around Marvel's Avengers, which are actually pretty well made. I was really shocked.
And this is kind of the point that I was getting at. Everything is so saturated right now. And I think it'll continue to be saturated. If they can make a video game out of it, they make video games out of it.
Downton Abbey, the video game.
Hey, I'd play.
I guarantee you.
A Telltale Games adventure.
Yes.
House of Cards, the video game, the most realistic pushing someone in front of a train sim ever made.
Yeah, spoilers. Jesus.
Yeah, well,
Damn, dude.
I mean, I think video games is such a healthy market right now. That's why you're seeing just these. You can really make any game you want to. That's why Goat Simulator and I Am Bread are finding fan bases. Like
Goat Simulator is a great game.
Yeah, that's why it's selling. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think saturation is definitely an issue with it.
Yeah.
But I think it's also given us so many good games. I think it's great.
Oh no, I do too. I'm not saying. I'm just saying that we have kind of this. We don't have to look for anything for an IP to be turned into a video game because somebody's already done it.
Actually, for total wish fulfillment, I know they've got a couple of Warhammer 40k games, but if you spend any... Yeah, but if you spend any time around me, you know that Gaunt's Ghost by Dan Abnett is my go-to in that whole universe. And yes, some of the heavier heads in that are like, Igard, whatever. But I like a good story, and Dan Abnett, I think, is a very good writer. And I think that there's tons of potential throughout the series to have any different style of game that you could possibly think of. The third book, Necropolis, all describes the siege of a superhive, and the sheer scale of it is mind-boggling. And
Is this where your PSN name comes from?
Yes, it is.
It
Ibram
is.
Gaunt.
Did you ever play Space Hulk on the PS1?
Space Hulk? No.
Is it a 40K game?
It's a 40K
it's 40K.
game.
Okay, I
You
thought it was
played,
just Hulk in space.
a team of
Space!
you play a team of Blood Angels, Terminator. Shout out to Sanguinius. And you have to navigate with what's called a Space Hulk. Essentially, it's in hyperspace. All these ships end up crashing together because of the way crazy magic physics work.
All right.
And it's full of what are called gene stealers. They're crazy giant space bugs that steal genes from other creatures to make new crazy giant space bugs.
It's terrible.
And you have to go clear out this Hulk before it crashes into a system, and these gene stealers get everywhere. So you're stuck on this giant cruise ship asteroid bullshit, just maze of crap with this team of Terminators, and it's a really brilliant squad-based shooter in the PS1 that was really about finding that perfect layout of who to send with what weapons where, to hold what hallways, to try to predict the enemy movements where the gene stealers were coming from. I mean, it was as detailed and as well-designed as Rainbow Six, and it seems to, except for, the niche nerds who had attracted from the 40K universe, it just kind of like slipped away into history.
Yeah, well, they keep making 40K games over and over again.
Dawn of War.
Yeah, Dawn of War was a really good one.
Really great
love that
RTS.
game.
But, they just can't seem to get the traction, and I wonder if it's because Blizzard has neutered their ability to get any traction in pop
By
culture.
stealing all of their greatest ideas and doing them really well.
And yeah, that's the thing is a lot of those ideas are really built upon those building blocks, but geez, look what they made. You're like, okay, I'm sorry. I love StarCraft. I love Warcraft. I love these games so much that I think I don't know if it crowded out Warhammer's ability to succeed, but it seems like they are always just the kid next door. Like they don't have what's going on in Blizzard, and every time they're like one step behind.
The nerdier, more hardcore kid next door.
Warhammer Online for Warhammer Fantasy was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
It was not a bad MMO.
I don't know. That is the first game that I remember being lauded as the WoW killer that failed.
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember when it was being previewed. They were like, "And here's the end of World of Warcraft."
Yeah.
And no, people I remember
Absolutely not.
3 of my friends playing it for a week. They're like, "It's okay."
Yeah, it was a good game. But, I mean, it couldn't beat WoW, and the idea that you tried to make a game to beat WoW was asinine.
Yeah. Well, and now I think the developers have finally realized that fighting against WoW is like fighting a platform. This is our game that's going to take Nintendo off the market. Well, it didn't work. Sorry. I'd make your money somewhere else. Yeah, well, I guess to kind of rein it back in, bring it to conclusion, I think licensed IPs are probably an important lifeblood for video games. I think they're some of the greatest games.
Yeah.
And I, for one, feel that I was in a position of incorrect thinking for thinking that licensed games usually suck. That's how I felt last week after looking at this. And I think after talking with you guys, I think it's pretty safe to say licensed games are some of our favorite games we've ever played.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
I just never really think about it. I feel like I think about it as completely separate things.
Do we have time for a blurb on a favorite old, really bad good game?
Always got time.
Excellent. Because I felt that I captured a certain sort of eloquence with this. But this was on the Terminator 2 Sega Genesis game.
Wow.
And I think it hit so many of the different topics and themes of what we were talking about. I'd forgotten how shitty this game is. However, it became apparent very quickly that this was skilled, enthusiastic shitty. The game seems to make no real attempt to mask this, and kicks things right off from the bar scene to a floor-stomper, hillbilly-themed MIDI soundtrack. Once you obtain your pistol and shotgun, they come into use constantly as your lame duck Arnold. Seriously, you can hurl yourself forward like Shaq with bad knees playing hopscotch, and set about the business of murdering.
What are you reading right now?
He wrote this for the podcast.
Oh, you wrote this for the podcast?
Yeah, no, well, these were my notes, and I kind of got a little carried away.
Oh my god, keep going.
And And so your lame duck Arnold sets about the business of murdering everyone else in LA with a gun, which is every other male character. The steady wham of your shotgun deserves a shout out for being particularly satisfying.
Wham!
Wow.
And so here's this thing where you can look at all the elements that come together into this game, and they're all uniquely awful. And yet, I remember on a snowy season much like this, way back in the mists of time, that I was like, no, Dad, we don't need to return this video game. I'm keeping it for another day.
Yeah, well, there you go. The joy brought to a boy and his whomping shotgun. It lives on.
Not to mention envisioning Shax crippled playing hopscotch. That's one of my few favorite things.
God. Yeah, so if you guys are having fun with these podcasts, do please come back. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on SoundCloud and iTunes. You can follow us in a Facebook group. We're also here on YouTube. And I think that's pretty much everywhere we are. Did I miss any of the platforms?
No, that's it.
Yeah.
Links are in the description below.
Yep, you'll see the links in the description below. Yeah, that's it for this week. Come back next Tuesday.
Thank you. Wham!
Aw, how did we forget about Shaq Fu?